Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. And I feel like this is a bit of a coup for me this week. I'm very lucky to be in the presence of one of Santa Barbara's most respected and well-known developers who is very involved with what is going on with downtown, both with his projects as well as being a visionary, serving on a very important committee looking at the future of State Street. So I want to welcome you, Peter Lewis, to the show. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm great. Thank you. Nice to be with you, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I'm so happy that you agreed to have a conversation about State Street and housing and development. And so let's dive right in and let's talk about a project I've written about, which is your project on the 400 block of State Street. I believe it's something like 86 units, apartment units that had been proposed. This is behind the Staples building on the parking lot. And it has, in my reporting, gotten pretty good feedback, pretty positive feedback. Is sort of a project that really tries to address the important need for affordable housing, to be able to do it downtown where people perhaps maybe will have fewer cars, will be able to shop downtown, bring a little bit of vibrancy. But I want to talk to you, Peter. Talk to me about the project and what it is, why it's important for downtown, and what's the status? Where is it at?
So yeah, it's actually 79 units with three small units on the ground floor that are commercial, that could be used as live work. They could be little hotel units, I suppose, or just little boutiques. So it's a roughly 80 unit project. And you're correct, it's actually situated right at the parking lot behind the old Staples building, between what was the Staples and Reed's Appliance.
Yeah.
So it is a perfect site for redevelopment because it's an underutilized piece of land that is just a surface parking lot, not servicing anything other than parked cars. So we basically are building a podium there. We'll still have surface parking in that on that land, but build a podium and then 3 floors above that podium that are for residential units. And it was a fun design to work with. I worked with Brian Cornell on it, and it's kind of a classic apartment building in the sense it's a courtyard design where it's essentially a big U, and therefore you can have units on the interior courtyard and units on the exterior of the building that will take advantage of the urban views that one gets from downtown. And so it really is a great site, a really fun project. It's got, we're creating a nice little paseo between this building and the back of the Staples, so that hopefully that'll invigorate kind of a pedestrian activity. That's really the hope with those ground floor units, is that's kind of energizes that ground paseo. But I am in the permitting process right now. It's been fully entitled for over a year. And we've been through one round at the building department. We'll be resubmitting for a second round this next week, possibly the week after. Hoping to have permits in hand by May and start construction shortly thereafter. And you know, I've built a couple apartment buildings in the last 6 years downtown, and this would be the third rental project. And there's an extremely high need for these units, and not just in the close proximity to downtown, but frankly anywhere in the, what I would call the core of Santa Barbara, really the east side to the west side, all the way up towards La Cumbre. So the core of the downtown is in great need for housing. the downtown is particularly in great need, and ironically, the least dense area, which is really kind of fascinating. If you think about it from an urban development standpoint, it's as if we avoided that. It wasn't by design, it's just the way that it's happened over time, in great part, I think, because of the history of retails and cars dominating the design and practically speaking over the decades.
Yeah, I think it's the largest apartment project that you've done, and certainly the first super big one on this part of State Street. Of course, Upper State Street. I don't know how big the mark is, but that one, was pretty significant as well. Who's going to live there? One, and what I mean by that is, how big are they? What are the sizes? Are these, the cliched, millennial downtown worker who doesn't like a car? Who are these units going to appeal to? And then if you mention about 79, 80 units, how many parking spaces will be on site? And can you talk to me a little bit about that whole new conversation that, building for people, not cars, and how this project fits into that?
So let's see if I can remember all these questions. So, it has 89 parking spaces on the project. Some of those are designated for the commercial activity that's going to occur there, because it is mixed use, right? So there's 2 commercial buildings. So for the residential component, there's 60 dedicated to the 78 residential units. So the project will need to attract, I'll need to find tenants that either are prepared to go rent spaces if they have a car off-site, and there fortunately is some of that near this building. But I intend to find people that don't have cars on many of these studios. So about half the project are studios that range from 500 to 550 square feet. The other half are 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. The biggest is only about 1,000 square feet. The average size of these units is 650 square feet. So it is really designed for young professionals that and/or people, they could be more later in life empty nesters that also don't want a lot of space and don't have the need for tons of storage space, et cetera. So they're efficient units. That is intentionally done because the challenge always in this town is to develop where you can finish with a product that is rentable and makes the whole project feasible economically. And the bigger the units are, of course, the more you're going to have to ask for rent. And ultimately, this really is made for people that are making the equivalent of a 60,000 to 150,000 downtown young professionals. I have a pretty good handle on that because the most recent project I finished was 29 units. I finished that just under 4 years ago. So I've been tracking that that project carefully, and the depth of the need for that demographic is extreme. Yeah. And it's not being served, and it doesn't, it's frightening, frankly, Josh. I mean, I've been in this town since '82. I've never seen the market like this. It's always been tough. From the day I came in 1982 and rented a hotel room in what was then called the Schooner Inn, now it's called the Hotel Santa Barbara. Mm-hmm. But it's pretty crazy. The last unit I actually had come vacant had 30 highly qualified people looking for a studio.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's pretty, um, it's pretty crazy.
And so your parking is going to be on the ground. You're not doing one of those stacked parkers. You see that
No,
coming up a lot. Mhm.
we do have stackers. They're not, they're two level stackers. I have not installed one of those systems, so it'll be a first time for me. You know, it's not, we're not inventing the wheel on this. The Europeans have been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
So there are some projects and there is some challenges in making sure that it's designed right and the right vendors used. I also intend to be a little experimental. I'm going to try either zip cars or possibly cars that will be owned by the company that operates the building, and just for hourly hire or daily hire by the tenants. So I'm going to experiment with that just to see if I can't get the need for the occasional car addressed for tenants and still encourage them not to have a car.
Yeah.
I know from my current project, it's not fully parked. So I do know that there's many people out there that intentionally don't have a car.
Yeah.
The closer you are to services and work, the easier it is to jettison the car.
Yeah. And we're not going to go too far off on this topic, but gas prices are outrageous right now. And if you're somebody who's wants to live downtown and knowing that's going to be a significant investment in your income, those are the kind of things you start cutting the corners with. Well, maybe I go without a car for a little while because of how expensive it is. Let's talk about the bigger moment in time, Peter. If somebody were in a time capsule, or if they grew up here in Santa Barbara and they moved and then they just plopped down, came back into town today, the whole conversation around State Street and the look of downtown would blow their minds. Okay. Things look so much different. And much of that was forced because of the pandemic. We were forced to figure out something to help the restaurants. And before that, retail was struggling. Retail's still struggling a little bit. And so a lot of these businesses got loans and, from the government, and they were able to survive, but they're getting grants. It's a whole fluid and changing situation. And restaurants that were there are gone. New ones are popping up and they're gone. And we have this State Street promenade. Okay. The State Street, it looks so bizarre. I mean, for me, I grew up here. You're so used to cruising, seeing the cars, driving down, making a turn, maybe parking in the mall and then going downtown. And now just people on bikes and walking and dogs and people eating and skateboarders and people on e-bikes. And it's just sort of this mishmash. There's all this people there now, right? And then we have the larger conversation about housing and what's going to happen. We just had a mayor's race, and it always comes up in terms of politics and who's going to do what. We have homelessness, and that's controversial. And overall, homelessness is down, I guess, from the homeless counts. However, many of the property owners, many of the businesses say it doesn't feel down on State Street, that this is contributing to what we're seeing with some of the turnover in storefronts. So it's a very complex situation, and people are looking at your project. Your housing is going to be one of the first ones down there that people could say it works, or they're going to learn from that and adjust. You are an expert on all this stuff, right? Can you talk about the moment in time in Santa Barbara from your perspective, and how important is it that your project is successful and that it invites people in who are going to do what you envision, which is not have cars and be downtown? What's your perspective right now of Santa Barbara at this point in time? Is this a defining moment? What's your take?
Well, I think downtown has been transitioning now for about a decade, really since the last recession. It never got its foothold and reasserted itself. So that rough period and decline, I'll call it a kind of a slow decline, really all coincides with a lot of urban stress that you see everywhere you go, particularly with any urban centers that may have had too much retail to begin with. And that essentially, in my view, has been the case in Santa Barbara for some time. So unfortunately, vacant storefronts beget more vacant storefronts. It's society moves in waves. Retailers want company. They don't want abandoned neighbors. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point. And I think today's reflects that slow decline and stress of retail. So, the Amazon has taken a 15% market share of retail dollars roughly over that decade. And the department stores have become less competitive. The big box and discounters have become more competitive and more ubiquitous. And as a result, you really, our downtown is a classic example of a lot of urban centers that are feeling this transition. And so we're not unique. However, because we have been a little over retailed for the last 15 years, we'll show them the stress in a little bit more of a obvious fashion. And all you have to do is go down State Street to count the vacancies at this moment, and they're more than there were during the recession, 07, 08. So we're struggling with that transition. It's going to happen. And I think the city planning staff understand that. I think they are not, I think they think a lot like I do, that they have to activate that street. And the way you activate it is you get people to live and work downtown and to shop downtown. So we need to re-engage our local retail community. We need to get more people coming from Montecito and other areas that have been reticent to come to downtown. We need to have interesting local stores downtown that command our local attention. And if we can get projects like the one I'm doing, more of these, it's going to bring the bodies and the activity and the energy. So, I've been on State Street since '82 in the 400 block when I first moved a company onto that block. And homelessness has always been a problem on State Street. And naturally, people that are indigent are going to be attracted to areas where they think there can be some, opportunity to get some money from panhandling. And also, if you think about it, if you're homeless, you're going to kind of go where there's some activity, right? You're either going to go to a place where there's some activity, or you're going to go to a place that you can sleep and be left alone. So traditionally, State Street has always been a little bit of a theater and a little bit of a place to observe, right? So I think we're currently making progress on the homelessness, and we're finding ways to get them off the street, to find some solutions and some transition housing. And it's not for the faint of heart, and CityNet has been doing a pretty impressive job. There's a lot of impressive people working on this, but it takes a huge commitment economically and time-wise. And I think what's happened is that it seems more profound of a problem when the state of the street itself is under stress. So, for instance, pre-COVID, when there was less pedestrian traffic, one homeless person is going to have more natural attention when there's 10 people on the street. If there's 100 people on the street, the one homeless person doesn't necessarily get all the attention. So people have been, quick to blame that as the problem. I really think that's misdirected criticism. I mean, the reality is we've always had a pretty strong problem there that has not ever been remedied. And currently, it seems to me that the people are focused on it in a productive fashion over the last several years, in the best way over my 40 years here. But I think if we can activate our downtown with more human activity, and that is not just during the day, but it'll go into the evening too, right? And that'll happen if locals are shopping and eating downtown and people are living downtown.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, well said. I grew up here and I always felt as though there was homeless and you sort of get used to it. I'm not a business owner downtown, so I don't deal with what they deal with, but I feel as though you can't just blame it on that, as an issue as well. You are on the State Street Committee that is looking at long-term decisions and planning and vision for what's going to happen with State Street. I think there's like 13 of you on there, and you meet and you talk and you sort of have all these discussions. And I think there's a consultant that's been hired, and you're going to be looking at all this stuff. What's your take, Peter's take, on the promenade and the closure, right? And then the 500 block where we have sort of the restaurant row and lots of activity there. I guess Old Spanish Days parade is going to be on Cabrillo this year. There's talk of the holiday parade returning maybe to State Street. Some of those festivals, Solstice will be on State Street. So we've had some change. What's your take on the promenade? How do we make it better? How do we improve it?
Well, that's a big question, John. So that's what this committee is really trying to study, deliberate, and hopefully come up with something that's going to be a really good solution long term, that's going to solve all the problems: retail, parades, just community activization and interest in going there. I mean, we have to, the idea really is that it's part of a renovation and rejuvenation of our downtown. So parades are part of it. That's part of the culture, right? Arts are part of it. So the committees, I think appropriately, are pretty open-minded at this time. And interesting, so we want to kind of go into the project eyes wide open. Let's learn what other people have done, what works, what doesn't, where it's a similar urban setting and similar aesthetics, similar principles and missions as a community. And so it's a real work in progress. And I feel that way personally, as I've seen the promenade uses evolve. And you're right. I mean, I give the city great credit for doing what they did. They showed a lot of courage, and I thought appropriately amount of risk taking that this city is really not known for. Yeah. And so it showed us that change can be good. Now, it can also be needing modification, right? So that's the great part of it, is we got a big, diverse group of people from all walks of life that are going to be providing input as to what they feel Santa Barbara needs. But I think that we haven't hired the consultant yet, but we will be in the next several months. I think it's going to be a slow, long process of a couple of years figuring out what this, the size of the promenade should be, the length of it, how we accommodate parades. So all these things are going to be studied, and I think allowing the community to give us input on it. But it probably is not going to look much like it looks today, because that experiment is helpful and in a lot of ways. So I think it's positive that the city did this on an interim basis, and those experiments are going to pay forward, I believe. But also I would say, regarding parades, sometimes you got to be careful about letting any one activity dictate what is the best long-term solution for the city. So sometimes I think we fixate on one piece of history, forgetting that history is transitional, it's evolutional. We don't, you want to pay respects to it, but you don't want to be held prisoner to history either, when it's not appropriate. So I think we need to all be flexible on trying to envision, all right, what are we trying to really accomplish here? Right? And ultimately, we want an inviting, clean, safe, attractive downtown. Mm-hmm. It's that simple. And there's a lot of great examples in this world that I think we need to study and see if it's appropriate and see if it feels right, and not be afraid to think differently, and be a little bit open-minded as to how this is going to evolve. I mean, if you think about it, in the 40 years I've been here, you're right, I've seen a lot of change. You've seen a lot of change. Some of it maybe didn't survive the test of time, so to speak. And that's okay. That's the human condition. And if you learn from that and you realize what's still standing and still works, then we can expand on that, improve it, and hopefully that's what our committee is going to do. And I think we'll get there.
Yeah, it looks very different. This is not State Street, but I remember when there was golf and stuff over on Hitchcock. That might have been right around the time you came to town. But we have that, and we never can get a bowling alley downtown, and I know that's been talked about. There's that virtual reality place that had popped up, which I don't even know if it's there anymore, but that was kind of cool, experiential. There's that escape room that's downtown. And so there's lots of different uses. So, the challenge is to sort of plan so that a lot of different types of businesses can be successful, not just the restaurants. The restaurants will say, this is perfect. And that's great if you have a restaurant, but if you're the block off the closure, no one goes there, then you're sort of cut off. Hey, real quick, Peter, I want to ask you about Paseo Nuevo. I like Paseo Nuevo. I know everyone says that malls are dying and we lost the 2 anchor tenants. I like the architecture, I guess I would say. I like the feel, the breezeway, walking through there. I can find places to go in there. It doesn't feel dead to me. It doesn't feel dying to me. And that might be because of the architecture. There are some vacant spaces, but do you envision a whole restart with Paseo Nuevo, or is there a savior to it? Is there hotels? I mean, I know that's complicated to talk about in a couple minutes on a podcast, but what do you think about the mall?
So that's an interesting question. So, like I was saying earlier, we are over retailed, and we do need to repurpose a lot of that activity, including things that you just mentioned. Entertainment, lifestyle uses need to find locations downtown. So that's all part of activating the downtown. Now the mall is, it's a challenge just logistically for a couple of reasons. It's controlled by the city on the ground leases, right? then you have multiple owners of the parcels. And, the Nordstrom's has a separate owner from the Macy's store. So I personally think, just like we were discussing earlier this morning, was we have too much surplus of retail space. So you got to repurpose that. Personally, if I were to have all of that land, and if it was my project, I would probably look to shift it heavily into mixed use with a lot of residential, which is a huge investment, right? I mean, that's the problem. These ownership doesn't really want to rebuild all of that 500,000 square feet.
Right.
So, that's a huge undertaking, and that's essentially what they're grappling with. Is they have a challenged retail environment where they can't attract and fill it at the moment, and probably going to be that way for the short term. And they got a high cost structure, right? A lot of the downtown is owned by families that have been there forever. So their cost structure is different than the people that own the Paseo. So as the property owners adjust to the new reality of the economics, the places that are going to get re-energized first are likely going to be the ones that are incentivizing tenants or are more motivated to attract tenants. So, things happen organically. And that's the thing about government. Government is best served if they don't get in the way of organic, natural redevelopment. And I mean, you can take a look at the funk zone as a really good example of how things happen naturally in development. You get one good little project, it begets another, right? And all of a sudden there's all this energy and interest. So I think that's going to happen, and it is happening downtown actually. But it takes the first project to get underway, and then others will come. You look at the 400 block, there's a lot going on down there, right? There's been a lot of housing development, and that's going to result in a lot more activity and commercial revitalization. And so the mall, if I owned that mall, that's really what I would do. But it's such a huge investment, and I'm not sure the appetite's there for that. Unfortunately, when properties get challenged like this, there's a tipping point. At some point, you've got to completely reinvent the wheel, or you can continue to struggle to try to make it pencil. And it's interesting, the Macy's is trying to now sell some big floor plates of office, and they may be successful, and because it's a great site and good parking, but it's challenging because of just the nature of the size of it. So Santa Barbara's going to struggle until those repurposing occur, and it's not going to be overnight, that's for sure. But retail is true. Malls in general, if all of the major mall companies are struggling, they're all repurposing their square footage, and we're not unique.
Yeah, I get a different feeling when I walk through La Cumbra Plaza than Paseo Nuevo. La Cumbra, I feel, is right in there with that national conversation about what are we doing here? This is not work, there's not a lot there, except for the Macy's building and a couple little places there, game store and etc. Paseo Nuevo, I feel like it's so much potential and opportunity. And of course, they're talking about housing on the other side of La Cumbre Plaza, the parking lot. And I agree with your point on the funk zone. My only criticism of the funk zone with not having government sort of leading the way there is the parking. I know that there was that parking study and said there's plenty of parking, but I swear, Peter, every time I've ever gone in the funk zone, it's the anxiety level and the stress level of finding a parking space. It's just, so I just park far away and walk in, whatever, get a little exercise. But, when you have these places balloon like that, it just exceeds all the off-street sort of, park or on-street and off-street parking demand. So, but yeah, funk zone's a classic example. City ignored it. Lower property values. People just sort of buying, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is the place to be. So that's a really good case study. Hey, Peter, I want to talk to you a little bit about you and your background. We have not talked a lot over the years. You're not one of those developers, property owners, I think, who has sought the public eye, who has been the face of their projects. I had to do some digging to find out, like, what does this person own, and that sort of thing. But can you talk a little about yourself and your background and where you came from and sort of what did you want to be when you were a kid and how did you end up in this profession?
So I grew up in Indiana and went to college in Walla Walla, Washington. So I was looking for a small liberal arts college somewhere on the coast and near the mountains. Ended up in a little school called Whitman College in Walla Walla, and left there after graduating with a degree in economics and spent a year in Europe backpacking, just traveling to mostly Europe. And after I came back, my brother who lives here, Kirk Lewis, was building some renovating houses at that time. This was 82. And he asked me to come out and he needed a labor for a couple of months. That's how I got here to Santa Barbara. And only came here with the intention of being here as a short, just a visitor. Ended up starting a business shortly after arriving, really just to make part-time income, not as a view of being a business owner. So I never really had that view of myself growing up, but ended up being a lifelong entrepreneur as a result. My partner, Deborah Keelcon, and I started a little leather tie company that we started selling these leather ties at the art show downtown on Cabrillo, on Cabrillo. So she was here studying landscape architecture at UCLA, and I was here helping my brother in construction. We started this little business, and it took off. I was able to end up selling initially about 100 ties a day, mostly to local little retail shops. Right at that time, retail, every little town had a fashion store, many of them independent, just one store. But that took off, and then I saw other opportunities, and we got into actually manufacturing clothing. Shortly, within a year, we were making clothing. And that business prospered for 15 years or 13 years. And during that time, I took a lot of our profits, if we had them, and we would invest in real estate. And during that time, we accumulated some real estate. And when we got out of the garment business, we ended up with some sites that were underdeveloped. And that's kind of how we started developing real estate. So it's kind of interesting. One business provided opportunities to go into another one. I've stayed in apparel in some ways, in the sense that I was investing in a couple of companies that did direct mail, which was also at the time in the 90s considered a great disruptor. All the catalogs.
Yeah.
If you think about the 90s, when all of a sudden your mailboxes were full of catalogs, right? So retail's gone through a lot of shifts and currently feeling the online transition and competition. But that's, I just got here by happenstance, really, and that's story is not as unique at all in this town, because many people are like that. They arrive here and they try to figure out how to make a living. And before you know it, they start a company or they start a restaurant, and it is successful, and then they can find roots. And I think that's why there's a lot of companies grown here. And unfortunately, not enough of them stick around. There's a lot of successful companies that have not completed their grounding here and staying here, which is unfortunate, because I personally think the city needs to do more to encourage that organic entrepreneurship and commercial activity, and less a concentration on the tourist, which, all great places like Santa Barbara are going to attract visitors, but they are environmentally and structurally not your best foundation for economic stability, because they come and flow according to forces outside of the community's control. They're not as stable, and they demand tremendous amount of services, and those are traditionally low-paying jobs. So we end up with kind of an imbalance, in my view, where we don't encourage some of these vibrant companies, and they end up leaving as they mature for lower cost communities. So we lose all that energy and vitality. But the one thing that we do seem to encourage, and the city is reliant on, are these bed taxes and the reliance on hotels. And hotels are just really not contributing as much to the economic vitality as, say, a young tech company, or company like Deckers. Think of what they're offering, what they provide to this community. Well, that company started as a sandal maker in Carpinteria, yeah. Right? That was a tiny little company started in a garage. So fortunately they've maintained roots here, but I've seen a lot of young companies that have left, yeah, for lower cost sites, and I just don't think that has to be the case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all really, really good points. And you hear that kind of over and over about how they have to leave for a variety of reasons. Government doesn't support, or it's too expensive. They'll go to other states where it's less expensive. And it's a challenge, and it's an issue for everyone here in government. You own the World Market Cost Plus building?
Yeah, so that was one of the properties we bought. My partner and I bought in the 80s. It was a Salvation Army at that time. It was an old Security Pacific building. If you recall, the bank was not on the corner. It was actually off, inland of the corner a little bit. And so we rented the parking lot was mostly rented for short-term parking, and Salvation Army was in the old bank building. And in '95, we built that site for Stroud's Linen, which was one of the big box competitors, a Southern California company that ultimately didn't make a Bed Bath and Beyond, and some other people kind of ended up taking their market share. But yeah, that was one of the underdeveloped sites that we owned, that we had acquired during our clothing manufacturing days.
Well, I hope that store sticks around. I don't know what your long-term plans are there, but I love that store. It's such a eclectic mix of things, yeah, in there, from the the little crafts and the knickknacks to the food and the cool stuff that you can just buy that you can't get at any other market, really, or any store. And there's furniture, it's a really cool place to have downtown. And I'm sure people wander in. That's probably why it survived, because it's unique. Hey,
Yeah.
Peter, you mentioned you were an economics major. What did your parents do?
So my father had an interesting career. He was a business major out in college and got a job working for the Dodgers in the 50s before they moved to LA. So at that time, the baseball industry had got all their players really from the farm system. They didn't get it from the universities. No one that was interested in the big leagues went to college. They went into the minor leagues and worked their way up to the majors. So he actually was hired by the Dodgers as a business manager for their farm system. Every team in the system had a business manager. So he started in Oklahoma and went to Mississippi and ultimately to Virginia before he got out of baseball after about 10 years, I believe it was. Got offered a job to run a small manufacturing company in Indiana. And that's when he moved our family there to Indiana and finished his career manufacturing a small manufacturing plant of making bedspreads and pillows. And it was interesting. It was about a 300-person plant, classic union plant in the Midwest. It was a well-respected, high-quality kind of custom manufacturing plant that distributed throughout the country. And like most of the furniture and home furnishing business, all of those have suffered from the foreign competition too over the years, and has not survived. But and then my mom was a housewife and took care of 6 kids that were all within 9 years of each other. So we had a pretty active, bustling household that she was very skilled at managing.
There are fights around the kitchen table for the last piece.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of big families that I know always talk about that. We had a buffet style dinner counter that we would serve ourselves, and all ate at a round table, our whole upbringing. And so it was, I would characterize our dinner table as no one was, there was always plenty of food in that regard. No one was worried they weren't going to get enough. But there was ample discussion around that table. My father was a great conductor of discussion. So he would make sure that we were discussing something of interest or import of the moment. A lot of times it was politics. He was kind of a political junkie. So, but it was, we always, it was always active. That's true. I mean, 6 kids in 9 years, there's something going on.
And you probably know how to defend yourself well as well, if you had brothers and, or it says just kind of competing for everything. Hey,
Yeah.
For those listening, they can't see it, but for those watching, they can see a very distinguished gentleman in the background of your camera. And I'm wondering if you could just talk, who is that? Why is that picture important to you?
So it's my paternal grandfather, and he was a banker in New York, president of a savings bank there called Union Dime. And he was president there in the 50s and right up until 62 when he passed. And he was still president of the bank when he passed, actually. My father, about 20 years after he had passed, he got a telephone call from the bank. They were at that time getting rid of all the portraits of the past presidents, including my grandfather. And they found my father and asked if he wanted the painting, and my father said, sure. So we ended up with this painting that came from a boardroom. He died when I was only 2, so I didn't really know him, obviously, but he's still an important part of my my history and my ancestry. And the painting ended up in my parents' retirement home, which I now own with my siblings on Lake Michigan. But it's a small little cottage that we all cherish greatly. But Pops, that's who my grandfather's called, who was hanging in the bedroom of the small cottage when my parents passed. My sisters were like, it's time for Pop to find a different home. So I was happy to bring him back to California. He's ended up here, ironically, kind of behind my chair, not really meaning to be in such a prominent position, but he was a distinguished guy. And as a result, it's kind of appropriate. I'll tell you one other funny story about him is that my father always cherished. He was very fastidious. He was a banker, really took care of himself, and very poised. He only had one operable eye. He had a glass eye, and that he lost an eye when he was quite young, and wore glasses. But despite him being so fastidious, when you met him, frequently the lens for the eye that was a glass eye, the lens of those eyeglasses frequently, that particular side frequently was not as clean as the other side. So he ironically would end up presenting himself not as impeccable as he thought he was, mostly because he didn't have sight in this one eye. But he was apparently a pretty impressive guy. He was a scratch golfer, and if you've ever golfed with one eye and having no depth perception, you'll understand how unusual that would be. But
yeah. Well, that's amazing, to be that successful and have to deal with that sort of issue, and
yeah, at that time too. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's cool. But I can tell, I can see the lineage, Peter.
Yeah.
He's very distinguished, and you're a very classy individual yourself. I want to wrap up. I really appreciate your time and you willing to share a little bit of your wisdom on Santa Barbara, on development, on housing, the future. You're one of the visionaries who's part of this conversation about how to redo, reimagine, redevelop Santa Barbara, and do it in a way that tries to please the most amount of people. And you're right there at the forefront. So thank you for taking some time to share information on all of these topics, and good luck with your project, which is, going to get built, it looks like, and your other future stuff. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me, Josh. We really enjoyed chatting with you, and look forward to seeing how our community responds in a very productive fashion, hopefully. And it's an interesting time, but it's a great time, really, because change can be so rewarding. And let's hope that's the case for us.
Yes, definitely. Thanks a lot, Peter. Have a great day.
You too. Take care.